do the thank you. Kirsten now will be starting this amazing second part of this book, Times of Health and Conscientiousness. And chapter 1 talks about acquiring consciousness. So, how do we do that, right? How do we get to this point? I would like to, Kirsten, to call you over. Let me try to regulate to the true height here. And I'll let you, all that you need to do, just test it. And then you just need to bring the PPT up. Thank you.
Oh, pretty accurate height. All right.
Yeah, that's
All
good.
right. All right. All right.
I measure well.
All right. All right.
You are beautiful woman.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here, both those of you who are on our live stream, but also here in person. You know, today is really interesting. I mean, it seems like a lot of things were counting against us. The weather is not great, and we're getting closer to the springtime anyway, and folks might be wanting traveling, and you know, maybe the idea of spending your Saturday at a place like this, you know, a place that is dedicated to inner growth, maybe you know, because it's summertime, folks just want to get out there. Who knows? But we are grateful for those of you and congratulate you for being able to make the time to be here today. It's always an honor. So, this chapter of this book, which we've talked about now for quite some time, Times of Health and Conscientiousness, which I shall show the book for our live stream viewers, but you all have seen this book already many times. So, this book is divided into two parts, and we are now going into the second part, which the first half of the book, the first 20 chapters, are more so to do with health, and the second part is to do with more with conscientiousness. Although both themes are intertwined somehow, shape, or form in the entire book. But we are on this chapter 1 of the second part. The last time we had our lecture, we did the introduction. So today we're going to be doing the chapter 1. And we cannot be alone in this and feeling certain emotions. Because when we talk about, and let me share my PowerPoint right here so people don't get lost. When we're talking about acquiring conscientiousness, it sounds super fancy and elegant, because Joanna for sure is fancy and elegant in her spiritual way. But as we were studying this chapter for some time now, and I like to think that we're not alone in this, what I'm about to say, that it was one particular feeling that came up repeatedly studying this particular chapter was the feeling, the emotion of shame. And recently, I was rereading a lot of Dr. Brené Brown's work around shame research. If you aren't familiar with Brené Brown, she's a renowned writer. She's been on Oprah. She went viral on the TED Talk a couple of years back, no, maybe 5 or plus years back. She became pretty famous because of her style to approach public speaking was unlike anybody else. She was very transparent. She was very real. And clearly people like that. And what is unique to Dr. Brené Brown is her research on shame. She studies shame and women, and how again and again her research has shown that all of us, men or women, can experience shame, but it still remains an aspect of our lives that we do not discuss. Because the very fact of it is, you know, when we feel shame, we want to hide it. It's an emotion, it's a feeling that often we are not even comfortable with. I remember a friend of mine who comes from a very religious Catholic upbringing, when she had gotten married in her late 20s. And then probably about a year or two later, her and her husband, they got pregnant. And she calls me to tell me, and she says, Kirsten, I feel so like I'm like shaking to call my mother and tell her that I'm pregnant. And I was like, why? She's like, oh, because, I just feel shame. I said, well, I mean, but why? She's like, I think it's because in my mind, I'm still like this young, when I'm with my mom, I'm this young person. But she says, no matter how old I am, when I'm in the presence of my mother, I still feel like I'm that 10-year-old little girl. And I feel shame to tell my mother this, because then she'll know that me and my husband, and she said, I feel embarrassed that my mother's going to look at me and know. So we had a really good laugh about this and how much, and I won't go into a whole long dissertation about that, but how much our upbringing and our childhood affects us into how we live our lives as adults. But this feeling of shame, and why this is important, because as we are on our own spiritual path of self-enlightenment, this is an emotion that can come up and also hinder us in a sense. And when I say hinder, not because the emotion in and of itself is bad, because no emotions are bad. Yes, I said that. Some might think, Kirsten, that's kind of crazy. There are a lot of emotions that are bad. No, they're not. They are simply alerting us to where we are at. It's like when it's a navigational system. If you are a sailor on the open shore, you need your navigation system to tell you where you are. You're not going to say, oh, north is bad, but south is good. But that's what we do to ourselves, to our emotions, to our inner lives. We say, oh, no, I don't want to deal with that. But the best thing we could ever do for ourselves is to face what scares us the most, to face our quote unquote shame. So when we were reading and studying this chapter, so much shame came up for us. And the only reason we share this is not to gain any sympathy or anything to that extent. On the contrary, it's because this research that exists on shame, that we do not discuss it. It's not discussed, even more so amongst women. It is an area when we feel shame about something, it can make us feel like we are the smallest being in the world, and that we don't matter, and that we don't have purpose, or we don't have value. And that is completely incorrect. So when we are on this path of acquiring consciousness, or conscientiousness rather, I should say, we will inevitably at some point encounter our own selves, our shadow parts of us that we are ashamed about. We feel like, oh gosh, I'm so like, oh, I feel so bad when I think about that. Like, oh, like perhaps when you're with friends and your friends remind you, like, oh, remember 5 years ago you said that thing and that was so terrible. And you're like, oh man, so embarrassed. Like, oh gosh, I wish I could just forget that. That's the common reaction. But what we want to share here today, because our topic is not about shame, but it's important that when we approach self-enlightenment, that we have the tools and the strength within us to look ourselves in this proverbial mirror and say, it's okay. Whatever I'm learning about myself, it's okay. Not to say it's okay. I don't have to change. God loves me as I am. No, it's okay. Let me accept who I am. Let me know where I am. Remember, navigational system. So I can learn how to work with those different parts of me. If I have a part of me that's kind of lazy, or a part of me that kind of procrastinates, or any other area where we where we struggle in, instead of hating ourselves, we can learn to accept it. And this is an important part of this journey of self-enlightenment, which we always talk about, right, in Spiritism, because that's the purpose of life. right? Having goals, being a better person. And it's really interesting. Some of you heard this already, but I'm going to retell this story that Leo told just today. And I thought it was kind of funny. Excuse me, I have some allergies. So, acquiring conscientiousness is kind of like this story I'm going to tell you. So, Leo and his friend, let's call him Adam. And thank you. Adam has issues with his eyesight, has for a very long time, and has, I do believe that Adam is legally blind. So Leo went to go and visit him. He had to have a surgery. Leo went there to pick him up and take him from one city to the next. He picked him up early in the morning, so it was light outside. So Leo was so kind and brought him like dark sunglasses to protect his eyes from the sunlight. But as time goes on, as they're moving from one city to the next, it gets darker and darker out. And at some point during the night, his friend turns to him and says, Leo, man, like, what was it? Now I'm forgetting. The lights of the lights of the cars are really dim here in this city. And Leo's driving, and I'm going to act like I know what he was thinking about, like, what? And he turns over to his friend, because mind you, Leo's driving. He turns to his friend and goes, dude, you're wearing sunglasses and it's nighttime. He's like, oh, I didn't even realize it. But that's kind of like how acquiring conscientiousness is, Oftentimes it's being around other people that alert us because we're not aware of it. We are oftentimes wearing sunglasses at night. That's how we are living our lives. Does that mean we're bad people? No. It's okay. We have to be able to reach a point where we're able to laugh at ourselves and say, man, gosh, that's silly. I was wearing sunglasses. But sometimes because of our atavistic, our upbringing, because of past lives, because we've either have so many incarnations going through different religious arenas, we carry this guilt. I once saw a bumper sticker that said, if you feel guilt for no reason, you're probably a Catholic. So, and that's no dig at Catholics, but any like devout Catholic will know you feel guilty a lot for every little thing because you want to be perfect. So we say that in jest, but we carry a lot of that guilt with us. And the point we would like us to get at, I think that Joanna would like us to get at, is to be able to look at ourselves and say, I was wearing sunglasses at night for a better part of my life. That's crazy. But here I am taking it off now. So that levity, that jovialness to say, oh man, that's crazy, and put the glasses down and move on. That's what we need to get to. And I know I'm spending a lot of time here in the beginning. And as we start this discussion around what Joanna shares in this chapter, we wanted to mention that no matter what lecture, what we talk about, we always know that there's a spiritual component in our lives. We know, right? We always like to remind ourselves, even though it's not specifically said in this chapter, that no matter where we are always under the influence of the spirit realm. Now, some of these photos that I'm sharing here on the screen can seem a little bit scary, with the exception of the one. But it's not meant to scare anyone, but it's just meant to remind us that the good, the bad, depending upon what kind of vibration we are attuned to, will be the kind of spirits that are attracted to us or are around us. So it's always important for us to be cognizant of that. That yes, we talk about working on ourselves, being conscientious, and all those things are super important, but we always have to add in that factor of spiritual influence or spirit influence in our lives, on our thoughts, on our behavior. So we just wanted to premise that by sharing this. And also sharing out conscientiousness, what the most layman or the most widely understood definition of what conscientiousness is. This ability to exercise self-control, goal-oriented, reliable, responsible, productive, hardworking, persistent, pays attention to details. These are just some of the common characteristics of the trait and how we define it. But how important it is for us to march forward on our lives and work on ourselves. In the book Action and Reaction, Ilario, we always love this quote. In chapter 18, he says, charity and worthwhile learning, faith and goodwill, optimism and work, art and constructive meditation are renewing themes whose merit we must not neglect in the rehabilitation of our ideas and consequently our destinies. The rehabilitation of our ideas. What a beautiful phrase, the rehabilitation of our ideas. And in the book Happy Life, in one of the chapters, I don't remember the chapter, Joanna's opening phrase is, be open to new ideas. It's important for us to remember that. And Lee, I'm going to ask you to turn the AC on for me because thank you. So in the Spirits book, and this is just the end, this is actually the on. You probably put the put it down to like 70 or 69 or something, sorry. At the end of this particular chapter, sorry guys, at the end of this particular chapter, which is funny because normally you would share this at the end of your lecture, but we wanted to frame our discussion today around this particular question in the Spirits book. And this is just the way that Joanna presents it. She says, interested in deciphering the enigmas of human behavior, Allan Kardec asked the benefactors and guides of humanity as set out in the Spirits book, question number 621. Where is God's law written? In the conscience. In the conscience, they answered. And there's a little note from Kardec saying, conscientiousness is a significant stage that you must attain so that you may follow the path to becoming a pure spirit. So acquiring conscientiousness is a significant stage that we must attain. It is an imperative. It is an area. It is where we shall walk and where we are walking. And it's highly likely we may not know that there are moments in our lives where we're wearing those dark sunglasses or even rose-colored glasses. But now is the time for us to become more conscientious of those things. Joanna starts out this particular chapter reminding us why it's important and about what is important about conscientiousness. She says, at the moment of conscientiousness, that is the point at which you begin using balance to discern right from wrong, you will have reached the high point as a human being, a natural effect of the evolutionary process. This accomplishment will enable you to evaluate critical factors such as good and evil, right and wrong, responsibility and irresponsibility, honor and dishonor, the noble and the ignoble, the legal and illegal, liberty and libertinism. So that is when we begin to almost come alive. When we acquire this conscientiousness, we begin to really, for a lack of a better way to put this, see, when our sunglasses are coming off, we're beginning to see. And what's interesting in this chapter is what she mentions here. The conscientiousness is not intellectual in nature. It's not an activity of the brain's mechanism. Conscientiousness. Rather, it is a force that drives them because it is born in evolutionary experiences, externalized as actions. We often find it in uneducated individuals, yet absent in learned ones. I'm just double checking something here in my book. Yes, it is the word that. Apologize for the typo here. We found this to be fascinating. Conscientiousness is not intellectual in nature, and that even educated individuals can be, or uneducated individuals, it could be absent in them. And oftentimes we think, wow, this person's educated, they should know better. And Joanna says, wrong. Not always. One doesn't necessarily signify the other. We don't always have conscientiousness simply because I went to Harvard or I went to school, because it's not intellectual in nature, but it's a force within us, because we can find people, and we're sure if we were to poll the audience online, those who are here, like if you could think of someone, or you probably could think back to the various friends you've had and experiences in your life that you've met a handful of people that didn't have the highest level of education, but were very self-aware, and those who had a high education and were not self-aware. We are sure we have met people in your lives that can prove this. But this means it's something much more deeper within us to be worked on. Not simply we go and we read a book and then we've achieved conscientiousness. And we're going to read this, and we apologize for large text here, but Joanna is saying all of this, and I'll read it here briefly, and we'll talk about it and why this is important, when she shares this analogy. If we were to analyze the behavior of certain specialists in respiratory problems, those who intellectually understand the damage caused by smoking, but who indulge in any such bad habits or scourges themselves, we would have to say they have not yet acquired conscientiousness. So, in other terms, if you, and we experience this working in our profession, when we used to work in the hospital, we would have a pulmonologist, it's a doctor that specializes in lungs, and he used to come to we worked in the ICU, he used to come and join us, and then at the end of his shift, when we used to leave, we used to see him outside smoking. No judgment whatsoever, but we always used to joke. Everyone joked with him, and he just laughed. Like, your specialty is lungs, and you're smoking. Like, he's like, oh, it's a habit. It's a habit that I've had. And he was from an older generation. He's like, I've had this habit for so long. And, before we even knew smoking was bad. So, at 9 years old, it's what you did. So here I am. So, but this is the reality Joanna's talking about. And there is a Buddhist saying that says, to know, but not to do is to really not know. When we know better, we do better. But when we have the knowledge and we don't, it's because we are not yet conscientious. We have not yet achieved conscientiousness. And I think I shared this last sentence from her. Other individuals may lack intellectual knowledge, but they have the lucidity to face life's challenges, choosing non-aggressive and dignified behavior, even at the cost of personal sacrifice. And here she leads us into where we can go. One's conscientiousness can be trained. That's good news. Can be trained by practicing lofty moral values aimed at the good of others and consequently one's own good. The effort to acquire healthy habits leads to awareness in relation to life's duties and responsibilities. Heirs to themselves, to past experiences, individuals evolve in stages, acquiring new resources, correcting previous errors, and adding accomplishments. If you could give an example of what practicing lofty moral values aimed at the good of others and yourself, what would that look like? You don't have to answer, or if somebody wants to answer, that's fine. I can repeat it here. But if you left here today and said, okay, Joanna says I have to go home, practice lofty moral values, good moral values, essentially, for the betterment of others and myself, what would that look like? And for those of you who are perhaps watching the live stream or the recording of this at a later time, feel free to drop those in the comments. There's no necessarily wrong answer here. We love engagement because it's important to engage our mind in these studies. Essentially, what can you do to help others and yourself? Acquiring good habits, yeah. What would one of those habits be? Eat well, sleep well. Mm-hmm. Walk, okay. Help other people. What's an example of helping other people? Listening to others. Praying for other people.
I think that this may be a step ahead, but to actually be aware of your emotions.
Be aware of your own emotions, sure. And one could say that's because if we're more self-aware, we can also navigate our relationships around us a lot better and perhaps essentially cause less stress for others when we're more self-aware. So that, yeah, in and of itself is something good. Because the more I work on myself, the better it is for others too, right? Take care of the thoughts. Be aware of your thoughts, Johnny's saying. Well, we come back to shame again. Because when you read the second half of this, or these sentences, heirs to themselves, to past experiences, individuals evolve in stages. We are heirs to ourselves. So when we find ourselves ill, unwell, unbalanced, there often is a ton of shame because we perhaps might say to ourselves, well, I obviously did it to myself. Maybe I'm a bad person. Maybe I did X or Y or Z. And we get into this inner dialogue with ourselves that is so damaging, that is so harmful for us. Sometimes needed because we have to be honest with how we feel about ourselves, but acknowledge and realize that Every single human being on this earth will go through these stages. Every single person that you meet that you think, oh, this person looks like they have such a wonderful life. Oh, they have such a happy marriage. Oh, look, their house is lovely. Their kids are lovely. Even their dog looks like it belongs on Best of Show, whatever that dog show is called, Best in Show. I think it's when all the dogs from across the country get together. Yeah. So, I mean, everything. Geez, even your dog looks great. Gosh. But it's not true, though. That's just external. It's just a facade. It's just the way it appears to be. But every single person goes through this. And I'd like to share this little minor anecdote that was shared with me a decade ago. And someone said to me, oh, I was so naive growing up. It was a guy that told me this. He said, oh, I was so naive growing up that I thought whenever I saw a beautiful woman, I thought, oh, she must never, ever go number 2 or pass gas. Ever. Never. Beautiful women don't do that. But I grew up and I realized, beautiful or not, everyone is a bodily function. Woo! Mind blown. And that's the reality we are dealing with when we're talking about each one of us have to go through this process of we're not perfect, we make errors, but some are better at presenting or may just seem, because oftentimes we spend half a day with someone and it seems like, oh, I know this person, and we know them so well, and I apologize again for the personal anecdotes, but just to illustrate a point. When we were a young teenager and we had a best friend, and him and his family seemed like they had like a perfect family. Again, even their dog was like so sweet. And for years and years, I always thought in my mind, like, oh, such a perfect family. This is before social media, mind you. We used to go to their house and, and like we'd always have this thing in our mind, like, wow, such a perfect family, such a perfect family. Fast forward about 20 years, kind of crossing paths with this old best friend again, and him recounting the horrible things. We say this laughing in a sense, but the bad things that happened to him growing up, he's like, that nobody knew about. And, so it's easy to judge an exterior. We don't know the lives of people. And it doesn't have to be one extreme or another. People often think, well, if it's not extreme trauma, then it's not valid. No, we all go through things that affect us on a deep level that can come, that we experience as trauma. So, how do we be better? How can we gain conscientiousness? Practice. Practice. There's not a single person that you could call right now or look up online or Google who's really good at their craft who haven't done it a million times over. There's a book called, is it the Outliers book by Maxwell? About 10,000 hours. I'm blanking on it now. But there's this idea that if you want to be really good at something, you have to practice it for 10,000 hours. And a lot of really famous people that have gotten really good at what they do can attest to that. Michael Phelps, famous artists, they have practiced their craft. They can go back and count more than 10,000 hours that they've spent towards this thing. And we were thinking to ourselves, can I calculate how much time I've spent on working on being more conscientious on myself? And people often think, oh, that's that seems like you're all about yourself. No. There's a difference between the ego, the purpose of the ego, what the ego has, and it does have a purpose in our lives. But to work on the self, me, is something different. Acquiring healthy habits. It's a question we can ask ourselves. How am I doing this? How am I acquiring healthy habits on the daily? And she reminds us of this, and we put this as a singular sentence in and of itself, by itself, because it warrants that. She says, acquiring conscientiousness is a life challenge. It deserves examination, consideration, and work. How many of you have ever like trained for or prepared yourself for, like, I don't know, a basketball game, soccer game, or I'm trying to think what else, marathon, triathlon. I'm trying to think what else might be relevant to our crowd here. Yeah, yes. So a recipe, if you want to perfect a recipe until you make it many, many times over and again and again and again and again, so you perfect that recipe and you have it down pat, and then you know you could share that recipe for generations, in your family or others to come. Have all of us at some point done something to that extent? God bless you. Jeanette with her cheese bread, and I just use that because it's the easiest and least invasive, personal. Others with other things. We know that there are folks that come to the SSB that have other talents as well. And we bring this up because we want you to think on how you felt when you were trying to work at that one thing. And that thing could be, well, maybe you have a plant in your house. And you were like, okay, this plant is dying. I want to help this plant get better. So you might read a lot. You might feed it at very specific times, like water, special plant food, put it in the sun between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m., bring it inside. I have a friend that does this. She's very meticulous about her houseplants, and they're always beautiful, always. Mine always die, without fail. I'm like, I put you there, you should grow. But we're bringing this up because this is what it should feel like. We always like to think about, well, what is this supposed to feel like? We can talk about things in words. We can say how beautiful they are and how spiritually uplifting they are when we discuss them. But we always like to think about real life circumstances, because we're going to leave here and live our life. We don't live in a spiritist center. We have to leave here, go live our normal everyday life. How do I translate this and what Joanna's sharing into my everyday life? And one of those ways, at least for us, is to think about what would that look like and what would that feel like? So for instance, a friend of mine sent me this new workout program. She sent it to me, and she had used it herself. She lost a lot of weight. And she said, Kirsten, I have to let you know something. Like, before you start, like, don't start yet. Let me call you, because she texted it to me. She said, let's have a conversation first. Don't go ahead and start it. I'm like, that's so weird. Like, why would you tell me that? I'm thinking to myself. So she calls me the next day, and she goes, oh, okay. So I'm like, dude, why did you have to call me? Why did this require like a phone conversation? And she said to me, Kirsten, I have to tell you, when you go down this road to do this program, you are going to be sore. You're going to want to quit. You're going to want to stop. You're going to find every excuse in the book why you don't need to do this. And you're going to find people in your life that are going to say, yeah, you really don't need to do that. Just go walk or something else, anything else. And you'll find every reason not to fulfill this particular challenge. And she said, but I promise you, if you do this in 1 year's time, you will be a different person. And I was like, why are you telling me that? She said, because it's what I experienced. It's what people, and her friend group and other people that she's known who've done this program. And it's important for us to be realistic and to say that, look, we're going to have challenges. We're going to face parts of ourselves that we're not going to like. They're going to be hard, and that's okay. But know that it's a lifelong challenge. It's not something where it's like, okay, 5-year plan, I'm going to become conscientious. And boom, I'm done. What's my next thing I got to work on? No, it's a lifelong challenge. Constantly examining, considering, and working towards this. And we love how in this chapter, Joanna uses the analogy of our lives, our earthly existence, as a business that we should manage competently and as carefully as possible. So think about it. Although some of us might not have that business mindset, but think about it for a second. If you had a small little business or a large one, you'd want to succeed, right? You want to, do well. You want for it to be successful, to be lucrative. So she says, your earthly existence may be seen as a business that you should manage as competently and as carefully as possible. You'll have to work with concrete and other more abstract data in the area of planning activities in order to succeed. All hard work and dedication will translate into gains you will always be able to use in difficult situations. When we look at our existence as sort of like a business, we say that, or I believe she says that, because the way in which business folks invest their time, their effort into that thing. And that's how we should view ourselves, making an investment in ourselves. We were having this discussion recently with a good friend of ours, and we were saying to her, because she does a lot of different activities with her kids and her family and her spouse, and we made a joke and we said, man, you're super busy. Like, you're constantly like, if it's not this, it's that, with the kids here and that. And then, she goes to church and they have this activity at the church. I mean, I kind of thought, well, maybe it's kind of like the SSB. We come here like 3 days a week, right? And it's what she does with her church. I'm like, wow, you're just so like, and we're making these jokes with her because it's so difficult for her, for us to find time to do anything together aside from our occasional phone calls. And she said, Kirsten, it's really important that, me and my partner and with our kids, we, work hard to, on relationships and do things and be active and this and that. She said, because ultimately, although this takes up a lot of our time, she said, I always think to myself, well, either I do this or 10, 20 years from now, I'm going to be paying a lot of visits to the jail or for a specialized therapist because I was negligent. So she said, I'd much rather just invest time now, and hopefully I will have traumatized my children less, that maybe they won't need to see their therapist every day, maybe just once a month. So we laughed and jest about that. But it's the reality that why not put that effort into ourselves to try to be better and be better for those around us? Because it is hard work and dedication. And no matter where we find ourselves in our lives, we'll be able to use that ability to navigate difficult situations in every area of our lives. And coming to a close shortly here, Joanna, finishing this chapter, gives us really great insights. She says, a few concise rules will help you with this undertaking. Kind of like a roadmap in a sense. She says, manage your conflicts. Manage your conflicts. We like to think of this as, in modern day times, when people say, get yourself together. But oftentimes that phrase is often more kind of mean in a sense. When people are like, they don't really want to deal with, they're looking at you like you have a lot of issues and they say, go and handle yourself. But in reality, that's what it is. We often don't want to hear the truth. We need to manage our own inner conflicts. We had a patient years ago who we used to case manage and who used to call on a weekly basis. And she used to call and complain about her spouse. That was our hour phone call, 30 minutes to an hour. Until one day, after many weeks of just listening to her, not saying anything back, just being supportive, she said to me, Ms. Dos Santos, all I do is call you and complain. I said, oh, is that how you feel? She said, well, yeah, it's okay. Well, that's how you feel. That's okay. I mean, I'm okay to listen when you call. That's all right. But you feel like you're complaining? She said, yeah, I think I'm complaining. I said, well, let's talk more about that. Why do you feel like you're complaining? She said, well, I call and tell you about all my problems with my spouse. But, I never really talk about me, how I probably play a part in this. I said, oh, that's interesting. How do you play a part in this? And so from there forward, for whatever reason, she had this epiphany. From there forward, our conversations were less centered on what her spouse was doing wrong and her own inner shadows that she needed to face and look at. So these are some of the steps to help us become more conscientious. Manage your conflicts. Psychological conflict is inherent in human nature and everyone experiences it. If someone says to you, oh, I'm fine, they are very much so like Leo's friend Adam, who's wearing sunglasses at night. Rest assured. Because everybody has conflicts. Some just hide it better than others. But everyone experiences it. Avoid following role models. This is important. We often find gurus or people in our lives like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be just like them. And we take all their advice. And then one day they do something wrong. And they fall from the pedestal to which we have put them at. But we are all fallible. So avoid role models other than Jesus himself. Because Jesus was perfect. He is our model and guide. They too are vulnerable to the same injunctions that you experience. And they sometimes make mistakes, which in no way should be discouraging. But it's best not to have a role model because we all are imperfect. If our role model, if we were to have one, can be Christ or Christ-like. But we think the safest route is Jesus and how he lived his life, loving, charitable, non-judging, accepting. Joanna reminds us, trust more in your own abilities, honoring yourself with the effort to continue to improve without becoming discouraged. If you err, try again. If you get it right, move on. Trust more in your own abilities. Trust yourself that you can accomplish things. Do not avoid facing your problems by employing erroneous, compromising, detrimental tactics. They will emerge later as unfortunate dependencies. I saw this meme of a dog in fancy clothes. It had like a really expensive purse on its paw and like jewelry and earrings. And the caption read, "Me when I've had a bad day after going shopping." And we were sharing this in our friend group, and it was really funny because it was a dog that was holding a purse, and that was funny in and of itself. But the reality is that we tend to create habits to mitigate or buffer or cover our problems. When we're sad, we may overeat or shop. People call it retail therapy. Or do other things that are just as detrimental. And quite the contrary, Joanna says, don't do that. Instead, when you get to that brink where you're like, man, today's been such a terrible day, I'm just going to go to Target. Or whatever store, oh, I'm going to go to Starbucks and whatever your thing is, because it could be 1,000 different things. Naturally, my inclination is to lean towards the more feminine persuasion and things that this gender tends to do, myself included in that. But Joanna says to face our problems. It is incredibly difficult to do that when we feel shame and when we are afraid to do that. And there's a book, Memoirs of a Suicide, psychographed by Ivone Pereira. And I'm not going to get into the long story of this one case, but there was a gentleman who had taken his life, and he was already in the rehabilitation phase in a hospital on the other side in the spirit realm, and he was attending special classes, and one of the therapeutic modalities was to have these previous people who committed suicide face who they were in the past as part of their therapeutic therapy, so they can move on with their lives. So this one particular man, he killed himself. He was in his 30s. He had met the love of his life. He had a great job at the bank, and he ends up stealing a bunch of money from the bank because at that time he didn't have money to treat his cancer. So he stole, let's just say, $1 million from the bank. He was going to get caught. So he decided, you know what, I'm going to go to jail, and I don't want to. And I just really screwed up. So he took his life. Fast forward however many years, in the spirit realm, he gets rescued, and he's in this place now in the hospital. So now this mentor and who's helping him through this process says, okay, well, one of the reasons that led him to his most recent suicide was because he felt that getting cancer at age 30 was so unfair, because his whole life he was a good person, that God was unjust, and he was completely rebellious in that phase of his life, because this is just not fair. I've done everything right, and here I am, the prime of my life, met this beautiful woman who I'm absolutely in love with, have a great job, but now get cancer, and now you're telling me my life is over? That's it? So he did not accept it. So part of his therapy was to accept why he had to go through that. So then they showed him about 200-300 years prior, in a previous incarnation, where he was a wildly abusive slave owner, and he used to sexually abuse his female slaves and their children, and mutilate the male slaves when they didn't listen. And in one particular crime that had became impregnated in his in his psyche was a particular horrific event that he caused. He had sexually abused a 15-year-old slave, and she was so distraught that she threw herself into the lake and killed herself. The father of that slave, the black slave, started yelling at the slave master, him, saying, "You're terrible. You're the reason my daughter killed herself," saying all these obscenities at him. So the slave owner in his big ego was like, "You're not going to talk to me like that." He told his guards to cut out his tongue, tie him to the post, and let him die. So as this spirit in the spirit realm is looking at his past life, he is in utter disbelief that he could possibly do such a thing. Now, granted, this is an extreme example, granted, but we share this story because it's a real story. Because we are afraid to face the things that we've done because they are a shadow. And what is a shadow? We don't know. It's dark. We don't know what's there. And we could find out things. And luckily, with forgetfulness of the past, we don't tend to remember those things from one life to the next. The grace of God. But we can face the smaller things, little by little, facing ourselves in the mirror, not just in a physical sense, but really looking at what I do, how I act on a day-to-day basis, and coming to terms with that. And this is another important aspect. Fight off depression and work without self-pity or laziness, because when we are facing our shadows, it can become really heavy. We do not have memory of our past life, but Joanna tells us we have emotional memory. That's why oftentimes we see people, and it's more prominent now than ever, with psychological challenges, emotional challenges, because we have emotional memory, but we don't know why we feel the way we feel. We just feel that way. Remember that yours are not the worst problems. They carry the weight that you lend to them, or that you lend them. So we attribute the value of what things have. Free yourself from complaining and spend more time pondering ways to persevere and be productive. Free yourself from complaining and spend more time thinking about how I'm going to persevere, how I'm going to be a productive person. What is done, it's in the past. All we can do is move on from now and try to be better. But as immortal spirits, is a tendency within our psyche, in our psychology, in our makeup, that we tend to ruminate. We continue thinking about the same thing, and even if we're not like consciously thinking about it, it's there in the back of our mind, and we're kind of fixated on that thing. And it may take us a really long time to get over that thing. I know we're coming down to our time here. And Joanna gives these pearls, these blessings, these, what I consider sort of like an emotional sort of pat on the, not pat on the back, because I would give a wrong feeling, but when you have either a mother or someone that's motherly comes to you and says, "It's okay. It's going to be okay." This is what this feels like, which she's about to say. Remember that yours are not, yours are not the worst problems. They carry, I repeated this. Here it is. Never give into empty time, for it gets filled up with boredom, discomfort, or perturbation. Whatever you do, do it well, with dedication. Remember that you are human, that the process of acquiring conscientiousness is slow, and that you will gain certainty and clarity through continuous action. Remember that you're just human, that this process is slow, but you'll gain clarity and certainty by working on this more, by continuous action. And this is the most important thing this last sentence of one of the last sentences of this chapter. Remember that you are human. The process of acquiring conscientiousness is slow. To have grace, patience with ourselves, and to be okay to say, I've had not only dark sunglasses on at night, but I've had them on my whole life, also with a bandana wrapped around my eyes. So sunglasses and a bandana. And be okay to say that. And I think that's one of the reasons why people that go into recovery from alcohol and drugs, whenever they start out their meetings, they always start with, hi, my name is Joe, and I'm a recovering alcoholic, or I'm a da-da-da-da, whatever it is that you're recovering from. And we think the reason for that is because we have to face the reality of where we are at. Face the reality of the stage that I'm at in my life. This is where I'm at. I'm 2 days clean. I'm 2 days since I haven't touched a chocolate cake or done this or done that, and I'm working on it. It not only reminds us of our own humanity, it also can remind others around us. And there's a song from the, I think it was like the early 2000s, from Avril Lavigne. She's not too popular anymore, but there's a line in one of her songs that says, and I'm only human. Yeah. So thank you all for listening. My apologies for going 6 minutes over. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Just figure out how to do that real quick. Okay. All right. So it's like, okay. Was that Elio? We've been, okay. Okay, fantastic. That is quite all right. Does anyone here have any comments that they wanted to share, something that came to mind? And if not, that's okay.
So, Kirsten, I wanted to
Thank you, Abby.
make a comment on that slide that talks about conscientiousness, or at least the requirement of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does it not depend on intellectuality,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I also got caught up on the idea of how we use reason and feelings to get to this point, get to this awareness. In your study, what would be, one speaks louder than the other in this journey, or is it something that try to speak on the microphone? Well, maybe not anyway. Is it important to have a balance of both to get to that point?
That's a fantastic question, Leo, and a really interesting reflection that you came to. And I would say it is on the journey of self-discovery and becoming more self-aware and conscientious, is that we will begin to find ourselves having multiple different parts of us feeling different ways. So what does that mean? So, and we've talked about this before, that it is very common for us to sometimes feel like, oh, I'm working on losing weight, but then there's another part of me that feels like this, what we might call the thinking part of us, like, oh, well, X, Y, and Z, and you're not, I need to go do this, and this has to happen, and this is not happening. And so we're getting so much into this thinking part that I'm not stopping to check in with the part of me of how I'm feeling. And I think this is what Joanna talks about, because there is this, it is important, obviously. God wouldn't have given us a brain and rational thinking if it wasn't important. I don't think that's what Joanna was saying necessarily. And I can bring up the slide real quick. The conscientiousness is not intellectual in nature. That is an activity of the brain's mechanism. Rather, it is a force that drives them because it is born in the evolutionary experiences externalized as actions. So we even can look back at civilizations that aren't as advanced as ours, where there have been pockets of people that have been conscientious, that it wasn't necessarily related to their, and we can also, and not necessarily related to their educational background per se. We can find, there's a case in Heaven and Hell of a child, I forget his name. It's one of the cases of the Happy Spirits section in Heaven and Hell. Those of you who don't may not know what this book is, it's this book. This is the older version. But there's a case in there with a spirit who he died at a young age, maybe he was like 10 or 11, and he was very wise. He was very self-aware for his age. So when he passed away, he explained why he, was that way. But it seemed as though he was more self-aware than his own parents. Like, how could that be? His parents have lived longer. They have more experience in life. But he was just, and you could say, well, how could he understand such complex ideas? He hasn't, gone to school to understand the complexities of life. Well, that's because conscientiousness doesn't require us to have that. But it's something that is internal within us. So I believe I want to say it's in Genesis, or no, not Genesis. It's in the Gospel, I think, where I think it's Kardec who says that what differentiates us from animals is our desire to be better. And that sensation is something within us that comes out of us. It's not something that we externally bring into ourselves, if that makes sense. And so that's how this makes sense to me. I feel like I may have gotten a little bit off your question, because your question was, which one is more prominent, the intellectual thinking part or the emotional part, right?
And just to clarify, I didn't think that she's saying go one way or the other, but I think that for some of us, one will be more, or will speak louder.
Yeah.
But and at the end, I think it's both, that you have to have a balance. But the reason I asked this question, I had a follow-up question as well. Maybe you can actually work on both, as you already did somehow with this first one. Is that what's my train of thought now? Is that either or, from what I understood, it will lead us to at least find out or accept that we are in that journey of getting conscientious, to be conscientious of what we're going through.
Yes.
And in a way, accepting that we have a problem.
Yes. So I think I know what you're talking about, because in the Spirits book, they talk about how intellectuality and morality follow each other in tandem. That one follows the other, and it's true. I don't think Joanna is speaking against that, or is speaking contrary to that. But just, I think she's explaining that conscientiousness is not intellectual in its nature, that it's something that comes from within us. We can be intellectual beings and be conscientious, but not all intellectual beings can be conscientious. So one doesn't mean you have the other. But I don't think that she means that in the sense that it's more to do with sort of like how it can come about, because she defines it as a force, right? It is a force that drives us. And it happens because of an evolutionary experience, and it gets externalized through actions. And whether you're educated or uneducated, it could be present in uneducated individuals, yet absent in learned ones, which tells us that education alone isn't going to, bring us this, make us more self-aware. It will make us more self-aware, but the way in which conscientiousness is, the way, the force that it is, I think it's something different and unique. But you bring up a good point, though. You bring up a really good point, that it is important still to educate ourselves. Education is important. This is not to say that, oh, I don't need to go to college. I don't need to do this. All that I need is what God gave me. There's truth in that. But there's a reason why higher spirits or perfect spirits have already gone through all the ranks of, having a PhD in physiology and all these things, because they become all knowing. So I think those are important. I think I kind of tried to answer your question. Go ahead.
It's the fact that through moments of analysis, with my therapist and whatnot, I found myself more often rationalizing things, rationalizing the feeling, and thinking that that was going to help me, but it's quite the opposite. You're running away from it. You're running away from what you really have to dive into, right? Because rationality is taking over. And this is so intense when you realize what you're doing, and it's so unconscious because you dealt with that side of yourself for so many times, so many ways. And again, you think that, oh, I'm going to go ahead and find the solve the issue or whatnot, right? No, quite the opposite. You activating other parts, or other parts are activating in you, and you're not able to see such a thing. You really need somebody to help you with that. And this also has helped me realize that you should allow the feeling to come through, right? And I think this is so helpful, to be conscientious of at least of what you're going through, because sometimes we think that reasonably I get this. It's like, okay, 1 + 1 is 2, but what is true? What is the true value of 2, right? And the I would like to also make a connection to 2 slides after, and we can go back to it, when you were thinking about running a marathon, that you running doing this. But this is a funny way, and thank God she's not here. But one day we were preparing ourselves to go out, and my wife asked, okay, should I wear this or this? But even in small moments like that in all of our lives, it may not be such an important thing, but that conscientious of that moment of what you're preparing yourself to and what you do in that preparation, all those things. And I think this, because for women, I think that has such a great value, that for us men, it's like, oh, okay, you wear this, right? But it is those moments that makes a huge impact in our lives, right? So it doesn't have to be anything great. Even something small, the smallest feeling that harbors our heart sometimes, we ought to kind of give that moment to really conscientiously feel it and embrace it. So that's all the other comment that I want to make. Thank you.
Is if our if our ability to rationalize and understand ourselves and where we may have gone wrong in the past was enough for us to move forward, none of us would need to reincarnate as much or go through struggles. Let me give you an example of this. In the book Action and Reaction, there's a story of 2 men who had spent a great deal of time, many incarnations, working very diligently on themselves, self-awareness, and had done really, really great work on themselves, according to the mentors in the book. But they got stuck, and they could not figure out why they were not progressing forward. So they went and consulted. This is all happening in the spirit realm, by the way, in one of the colonies. They went and consulted a higher mentor and said, look, we're doing this work, and we don't understand. The both of us are having a similar issue because we're good friends. But, why we're not progressing? Why are we not able to ascend? So the mentor said, okay, let's do some investigation. However they did this, I don't know, but they investigated the past lives of these 2 individuals and found that one of the reasons that they were stuck where they were was because about 500 years prior, or many incarnations back, so far back, they had killed 2 people by throwing them off the side of a cliff, which at that time in that particular area in the world was not uncommon for people to get rid of other people. So what had to happen? These 2 spirits that were already quite elevated had to reincarnate on planet Earth. Their mission was to help, in a small way, help aviation progress forward, and then they themselves needed to die in a plane crash. Now, you could say, Kirsten, well, the mentor brought them to, like, remember their past life where they had killed these 2 people. Clearly, they're at a stage in their evolution. They were like, that's totally wrong. Okay, they're aware of it. They know that it was wrong. They're never going to do it again. If that rationality was enough, they wouldn't have had to come back. But there's something about going through that experience that changes us on an emotional level, down to our cellular emotional level, that our thinking part or our intellect does not suffice. So that's why it's important for us to have experiences to some degree. Now, that's not to say that every person, because there is mitigation. We learn about that in the book Action and Reaction. There can be a mitigation, attenuation of our debts. For those particular 2 people, that is the way that they had agreed to come back. And I think one of the reasons was because they just wanted to move forward. They could have come back, I believe, in maybe many lifetimes, but they wanted just to sort of, I guess, maybe expedite it in a little bit. So it was very peculiar to their situation, and every case is different. So I'm illustrating that just to say that it's not enough for us to rationalize. So thank you, Leah. That's I don't know if there's other, but if there are no other questions, comments, I think we can move on to the second part of our meeting. So I want to thank everyone for watching this live stream. And if you have any questions, you can find us on our website at ssbaltimore.org and reach out to us via email if you have any questions. So everyone, be blessed. Thank you so much for watching.